Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 89, believe it or not. And we're joined by a very special guest. His name is Zac Hyden, the Mad Redneck. And we will talk about that some in a second. Zac resides currently in Alabama. Zac runs the Automotive Free Clinic that I'm sure that we're going to talk about. That was one of my initial points of interest to bring him onto the show. And also a shout out to Jake Carrico, one of the comrades who's been on the show at least 4 different times, gave me a great recommendation, said you need to have Zac Hyden on the show. And so I reached out to Zac and he accepted the invitation very quickly and excitedly. And so we are definitely going to learn more about Zac today. And Zac obtained his PhD at the University of Berkeley as well. And we're going to talk about, especially start out with his bio and his story. What is the Zac Hyden story, and how did we get to this point that we're on now? I just want to say welcome to the show, and thanks for accepting that invitation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. And again, this is going to be quite an episode. I'm already excited about it. I was really looking forward to it when you accepted the invitation because um, listening to some of your interviews, watching some of your videos, I feel like we have some interesting synergy and just unique backgrounds. We both have PhDs. We both come from the South. We
Yeah.
both have gone through transitional periods in our life, like significant transitional periods that we can probably talk about too. But I just want to give a shout out to all the listenership and all the viewership, especially the viewership, because I'm really not doing the pod version of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum anymore. This is strictly a YouTube channel right now because of popular demand. It's way easier to edit. And I just want to say thanks to all the people who support Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. We've reached over 165 different countries in 16 months period. And that was always the point, to make this an international forum. We have about 42% of our audience outside of the United States. And you're probably wondering, how would this conversation fit into this international conversation? It's amazing. If I listen to all the archives of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, you realize that most of us are just interconnected some kind of way. And I think we have to think in terms of global and not within your own zip code. I think that's a mistake that a lot of humans make in general. We got to
Mhm.
look outside of our own walls. And hopefully, this conversation and other ones that we have down the road can debunk a lot of these myths when it comes to what we don't think we have in common. I think there's so much in common that meets the eye. Is just you have to penetrate the barrier, and that barrier a lot of times is your mind. And so I just tell people, open your mind and just consider a little bit of your time. And remember, you can't unthink free thought. So let's start with Mr. Hyden and ask him, first of all, what is your story? Like, are you originally from Alabama? And
Yeah,
how
yeah,
did how did you get to this point?
I was born in Birmingham in 1978. I've lived all over Alabama. Like you mentioned, I did get lucky enough to get a PhD from University of California, Berkeley. It's probably one of the greatest experiences of my life because of what you just said, which is that I got to meet people from all over the world who are doing amazing things and realize that there's commonality in what we're doing. And one of the things that I learned at Berkeley, and this I'm trying to speak to what you're speaking to about internationalism. Um, I was talking to a scholar from India, and she was studying, I think, internal colonies in Bangladesh. And I'm like, well, internal colony, she started describing it. And I'm like, that kind of sounds like the American South. And from her, I started to develop this theory of the American South as an internal Orient, which has also been written about by Machado and I can't remember the other guy name. He is at Penn State. So, the South is a place of um, natural resource extraction. It's a place of labor extraction, and Alabama is now producing more cars than Detroit did during its heyday. So, it's all non-union labor. The number one industry in Alabama is timber, and 62% of the timberland in Alabama is absentee owned. So it has the economic characteristics of a colony, and it also has the cultural characteristics of the colony in the sense that we're orientalized and we're exotic, backwards, sexually deviant, racist, sort of uneducated, that sort of thing. That's how our culture is characterized. And so my theory is that we should look at the South as a node on international trading networks, and that the way the South is shaped is directly relevant to its position in the global economy. And we should think of it not necessarily as a part of the United States, but as a part of the globe. So anyway, that's back to my story. I was born in Birmingham, as I said. My dad was a traveling salesman. He sold wholesale meats, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was also a Church of Christ preacher, which, if you know anything about the Church of Christ, rigidly fundamentalist, very sort of brutal church. And my dad was a brutal man. I mean, he was like no sugarcoating it. He was a brutal man, which caused me to have trauma that led to me having a serious mental illness. I have schizoaffective disorder. So I grew up in that type of unstable environment. And when I turned 16 years old, I decided to join the church. And I thought that, this was just going to be a formality. And the elders grilled me for 2 hours and told me I was heretical and sort of made it known that I was unwelcome in the church. So I lost faith. I didn't go to college. I quit going to church, and I became an auto technician. And I did that for about 7 years. I was pretty good. I was a decent auto technician. But when 9/11 happened, I had been listening to music like Rage Against the Machine, and I had started to have questions about empire. I didn't really necessarily know if they were questions about empire at that time, but that's what they were questions about. And I reacted differently to 9/11 than my peers, which my peers were to bomb it, bomb the Middle East back to the Stone Age. And mine was, this was an organized group of people who attacked another country. Why? Why did they attack another country? It wasn't some random crazy person. That's the way they characterize it. These are crazy people. But it was not crazy people. It was people who had legitimate grievances. Now, that doesn't justify what they did, but they had legitimate grievances against the United States. And that's what I learned in college and in grad school. I studied urban agri. I became interested in solutions. I became a solutions oriented type person. And I looked at Birmingham, Alabama, which was my hometown, and I thought, what's going on in Birmingham? And you can see gentrification and racism, white supremacy were two things that were very prominent. So that's what I studied in Birmingham, Alabama. And in 2010, as a part of my dissertation research, we started Magic City Agriculture Project, which our goal was to put an aquaponics cooperative in every disadvantaged neighborhood in Birmingham, which would solve the hunger issue and solve the employment issue at the same time. And we totally fucking failed. We didn't get one built. We did not get one built at all. Nobody believed in our vision. We couldn't raise money. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were just kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall. But we did write a strategic plan for Birmingham, and that strategic plan caught the attention of a young politician named Randall Woodfin in 2015. And he indicated to us that he was going to run for mayor in 2017, and that he wanted our support. And the coalition that we had built, the anti-racist and anti-gentrification coalition that we had built. And, my initial thoughts on that was, fuck this, I'm not getting involved with politics. Is my initial. But Woodfin courted me for the next 2 years, and during the campaign, he endorsed the Black Agenda, which was a combination of Black Lives Matter's policing reform strategy and our economic development strategy. And he endorsed that. And I'm like, I've been preaching this shit for, 7 years now, and I don't think I can not endorse him. Like, he's sort of done what he told her. And he won. He beat a machine candidate who was handpicked successor to Richard Arrington, who's sort of the godfather of Birmingham. And when he got in office, he totally betrayed us. Mm-hmm. And that about ended me as far as activism and organizing and politics and anything. I was done. My wife got a job in Montgomery, which is the capital of Alabama, and I moved down and I went back to work in a shop, and I was just furious. I was just furious at a lot of different things, a lot of things that went on in Birmingham that I sort of started to believe were not really good for me, and that I was sort of manipulated by a lot of different forces. And I was just sort of working through all of that over the next 2 years. And then the pandemic hit, and I looked at the people who had invested in so much time and effort and money into me, including Louise Fortman and Connor Bailey, Carolyn Finney, others of my mentors and family and friends who had done so much for me to allow me to get a PhD and to be able to be a leader. And I felt like I owed it to them and my community to show some leadership during the pandemic. So I got together with some old comrades, and we started the Automotive Free Clinic, which is a free and low-cost auto repair shop. We charge commercial costs for the parts, so we don't mark them up, and labor is donation-based. We survive almost exclusively by individual donations. We have not been able to get institutions to fund our work to any large degree. So we basically just skated by on a nothing budget for 4 years, and we've repaired almost 500 vehicles. We've given away 6 vehicles. We hosted a panel at the World Social Forum in 2021. So we've done a lot of stuff, and we've accomplished a great deal. And I should tell people that I'm resigning from my position as executive director on March 14th because I got a baby on the way, and I'm going to raise my boy as a stay-at-home dad. And that's going to be my focus from here on out. Also working on a book called Redneck Liberation Theology, which I suppose I'll have a bit more time to work on it, but who knows with having a kid. This is my first kid. So, I don't know. I don't know if I'll have time or not, but that's the plan. And that's pretty much me. That's pretty much my life story. And, it's been an interesting ride thus far. I got a wonderful wife, Robin Hyden, who's the executive director of Alabama Arise. In some ways, she's way better than me. In a lot of ways, she's way better than me. She's a really incredible person who has helped me to heal in a lot of ways from, some of the things that have happened to me.
Yeah, that was quite an interesting backstory. And I know there's a lot more that you probably could have said, but you gave us more or less, an idea into your backstory, which is totally great because you said a lot of stuff. But honestly, my audience, not my audience especially, but people that I have talked to before we started this show, I send them bios of people. I send them the pictures of the people. And when I sent your picture to some of my inner circle, there was a strong reaction to it. And I think a lot of it is because of this presumption that people have of the presumption of images. And
Yeah.
you spoke of the South earlier, but the language you're using is very much a language that's ingrained in working class, is ingrained in, you mentioned the timber industry, and you mentioned how the non-unionized workers are being exploited, and you
Yeah.
used the comparison of an internal colony. You compared the U.S. South to a colony, and
Yes.
that's a really interesting point that I want to take from you and delve into a little bit further. But I'm curious, in your opinion, what is one of the biggest misconceptions when we talk about the intersection of politics in the South? What, in your opinion, being from the South, is one of the things that sticks out to you when people make these assumptions about what people think and what they feel?
Yeah, we're all a bunch of Trump supporters. And let me dispel that myth right now. In Alabama, in the 2020 election, 37% of the voting eligible population voted for Trump. 38% didn't vote at all, and the rest voted for Biden. So more people didn't vote or voted for Biden. Almost twice as many people didn't vote or voted for Biden than voted for Trump. The South's politics have historically been, especially in Alabama, have historically been minority-led, one-party systems. And that's no different in the South. It's a Republican-led, which is the minority. It's the largest minority aside from non-voters, and it's Republican-led, one-party system of the minority. And really, the South is probably the most diverse region politically, racially, ethnically, in the United States. And I think what I wanted to dispel is that is one big red blob, which is what they show on all the maps. One big red blob. This is the South, one big red blob. And if you actually look at county by county data of voting, you're going to see most of the blocks, and especially where so-called white people live, do not vote at all, or a plurality do not vote. And to take this even further, if you look at the 2016 election, if did not vote could get electoral votes, it would have won do not vote would have won in a landslide.
Dude,
So it's not just the South that's not voting, it's everybody that's not voting, but especially working class areas don't vote because they have nothing to fucking vote for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's whether it's Biden or Trump or whoever, the Clintons or W or whatever, the working class has lost faith in the governing institutions of the United States. And, we have something that we say in our communities, nobody's coming to save us. We always say that. We say, no, nobody's coming to save us. We got to save ourselves. And I mean, that's part of the ethic of the Automotive Free Clinic is that we got to help people stay on the road ourselves. We can't depend on the powers that be to make the right decisions or to not be corrupt or anything like that. We have to actually take it under our own creativity and ingenuity and resourcefulness to be able to provide things for our community. Mm-hmm. So we've gotten to the point now as working class people that we just don't expect the governing institutions of this country to do anything meaningful for us.
Wow. So again, there's a lot to consider what you're saying. There's just so much, there's so many thoughts going on. And my biggest thing would be, I think of Alabama, like you said, I don't know. I mean, I think a bigger question for me would be, what is the South? Yeah. I've always tried to contextualize things within more so the mindset than a space associated with boundaries on a map. And I think now with for instance, my neighborhood, most of my neighborhood, none of the people are from Tennessee originally.
Yeah.
So it's like at some point, if that's happening all over the country, like all these people moving, going places in and out. So at what point is the South, is that just simply an idea, the whole idea of the North and the South? I mean, because when I travel, I see people who are very curious about, society. I don't really see these divisions the same way as they're reflected on some of the bigger platforms. I don't believe that the division is as deep as they're portraying it. I think a lot of it is simply we have so many walls already up, and we just make these assumptions because we're already put in groups. We're lumped, as my dad likes to say, we're lumped and dumped all the time. And believe it or not, the United States does the best job of this than any probably existing empire when it comes to lumping and dumping. If you're in this country, you're going to be dumped and lumped into some category, whether it's black, whatever. You mentioned so-called white. I mean, you're white, you're black, you're poor, you're part of this society, you're part of this group. But it's been effective. That type of propaganda has been effective because I've seen it. I was talking to Radhika Desai a few days ago, and I just released episode 88. If people want to watch episode 88, and we talked about this discontent, how Trump successfully capitalized on the discontent of the working class.
Right.
And not just white people. I know a lot of, and that's the thing about it, because the protocols of polite society, you have a lot of people who are black people that aren't even necessarily right-wing people, right-wing minded people, but you have a lot of just black people, Latin people that honestly they supported Trump and they still continue to support him because they don't know what else to think about their, direction in their personal life. And that goes against conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom tells you these people aren't supporting a person like him in high probability. But I test those people. I totally go against that grain, and I don't believe the real statistics. I think when you talk to people on the ground, you can't assume anything about anybody. People, somebody supporting them. It can't just be white people supporting Trump. I know that that's bullshit, but why do people keep justifying that stuff, that type of rhetoric?
Yeah, I got two things to say. That one, I have a really close friend who's a black nationalist, a guy I've been in wars with, and I mean political wars with, a guy I've been friends with him for a decade now. Huge Trump supporter. Huge Trump supporter because Trump just sticks his finger in the eye of the Washington establishment.
Mm-hmm.
From what I have learned from hanging out with rednecks and is that they like Trump not because he's honest, not because he's forthright, not because he's a good person. They like him because he sticks his finger in the eye of the establishment. But another thing I want to say, the reason I said so-called white, I think one of the solutions to the issue, to me, is white people is not an empirically verifiable category. There is no such thing as white people. If you look at the group of people that is categorized under the category of white, it's essentially totally random culturally, almost
Mm-hmm.
totally random. So for me, the solution is to get people to stop fucking identifying as white at all. Be Italian, be Irish, be a redneck, be a hillbilly, be German. But white doesn't mean anything. Like it's meaningless. It's a meaningless term. Now it was invented with a purpose. It was invented with the purpose of manipulating labor, but it's never meant anything real in terms of cultural unity. And I started telling people in my communities, and when we have these conversations, I started telling people I ain't white. I don't identify with it. I don't want it. I don't want none of that. I don't want to be associated with it. And
Mm-hmm.
that sort of gives people sort of pause. They pause a little bit. They're
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know if they necessarily agree with me, but it makes them think. And I think that's what we need to do is we need to articulate visions and narratives that make people think more and not necessarily try to convert them to our specific faith or whatever. Like the evangelical model of activism just pisses people off, just like the evangelical model of Christianity just pisses people off. Anyway, that's a little off topic.
No, two things you said. The word redneck, I've never, when I was a kid growing up, I always had a negative connotation associated with redneck, but you're using it so freely. Can you give the audience an idea of, like, what do you mean when you say redneck exactly? Because
Yeah.
people are going to say he said in one instance that he speaks about rednecks freely. Like who's he referring to? And then on the other instance, he says that he doesn't want to be associated with white. And people were probably like, it would make them consider different things. I know for me exactly, um, I kind of question the white. I hear people say that, like I've heard my wife say this stuff before, that almost how white people don't have really a cohesive culture.
Culture, right?
Um, but I don't know. I mean, to me that's problematic. That type of even that's problematic to me because whites, if that's the case, you're basically making an assumption that white has always been what it was, or that association. Who was white? I mean, that changed over time. I mean, that's changed over time in this country.
Yep. Yep.
The whole idea of white, I mean, black, I mean, what does that say about someone that's black? I mean, couldn't you use the same argument in that I guess, situation? Isn't that the same thing? I mean, or was it
I think
completely different?
I think it's completely different because here's the thing. Um, when Africans were lumped into a group and labeled black, through the process of enslavement, much of their culture was erased. So after emancipation, black people had to build a new culture from scratch. So to me, the term black people indicates an ethnicity of black culture. So to
Mm-hmm.
me, also, redneck is an ethnicity. It's not racial. It's an ethnicity. It's a
Mm-hmm.
culture. And all cultures have to have a kind of founding myth. And the founding myth for redneck culture is that the 1921 West Virginia mine wars, um, the workers fought the Pinkertons, the U.S. government, and the companies for the right to form a union. And to symbolize their solidarity, they wore red neckerchiefs around their neck, rednecks. So
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the founding myth from redneck. So like you said, you're right, things change over time, and redneck has gone through evolutions, outlaw country, that sort of stuff. Um, but to me, and in our communities, when we've discussed this, we actually did a 6-week study called Redneck Studies. And we came to the conclusion that redneck is a way of life. It's resourcefulness, it's do for yourself and your community, it's discipline, it's, kind of to a degree being carefree. That it's a culture and a way of life. So to me, anybody can be a redneck. You could be a redneck. Anybody can be somebody in Mexico can be a redneck. Somebody in China can be a redneck. Anybody
Mm-hmm.
can be a redneck if you have these sort of cultural sensibilities about you. Um, so yeah,
But you're almost reclaiming a term, right? Would you say that because uh the baggage associated with that term has gone through any term you can think of. The word queer, for instance,
yeah,
I study queer studies in Latin America. I do Black studies in Latin America. I mean, queer wasn't always the word that it means now, in academic circles, and it sounds like redneck is like this too. But because if you're talking to people where I'm from, my neighborhood, they're going to see redneck as one thing. They're going
yeah,
to associate it with the C word, another word that I don't use at all.
yeah,
And that's it. I don't know if that's tunnel vision. I don't know if that's just the way people grow up in an environment and they don't test their views any. But I just know that redneck in my community, when I grew up in my community, had one meaning: white person from the South, and usually a very negative connotation, probably indicated their socioeconomic status. They're probably from a trailer park, something like that. And I think that's kind of the narrative that you've had, and they've taken over it. Because then you have the Jeff Foxworthy types that basically start out their careers and hence their careers using this word redneck, these tropes of what redneck is, and it sounds like you're battling against all of that stuff that we've been thrown, that we've been taught all these years.
yeah. I think that's accurate, but it's also true that I don't have anything else. That's it.
Mhm.
That's all I got. I got redneck, and that's all I got. And I say that because I've been through the powerful institutions. I've been through Berkeley. I've tried to get academic jobs. I've tried to be in politics, and I was always, at least in some way, rejected. And I ran away. I tried to be something that I wasn't for a very long time, and I had nothing. I didn't have anything. I didn't have an identity. I didn't have a home. That in that way. And then, I sort of started thinking about it in 2015. I went to Highlander in 2015 as a Greensboro Justice Fellow, and I started thinking about the people that I grew up with and my friends and my experiences and that sort of thing. And I came to the conclusion that like these are redneck experiences. And that's all I got. All you got are your experiences. That's it. So I got to name it something. And
Mhm.
I got to name it what it is, which is redneck. And if people don't like that, like, I'm sorry, but that's all I got.
Yes, that's totally understandable. And something you said there is I talked to Norm Finkelstein. You brought him up off camera because I've interviewed Norm twice, and that's a part that I pushed back on him about. I mean, he basically was he was arguing in his new book, I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, about the tokenism of black people basically in academia. He outed out a lot of people. Rob D'Angelo isn't black, but I mean, a lot of the people that he attacked in the book were these so-called, I would call them, it's almost like the Democratic Party uses these black faces in high places, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, the Congressional Black Caucus, all these figureheads that basically, I call them modern day blackface is what I call it. And I remember I said that on a pod a long time ago, and people were so angry at me because I was a black person calling out other black people who they're obsessed with basically. And it's still like this. I understand 95% of my quote unquote friends on social media, they kiss Barack Obama's ass if they could. And just because I don't, that means I'm automatically something else. And I'm just like, no. I mean, that's the face of the establishment. Going back to what you were saying earlier, like to me, that is simply that's the gatekeeping industry. That's academia. That is the University of California at Berkeley. That's the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I had to combat that, and that's why I was trying to tell Finkelstein it doesn't matter all this stuff he's talking about. I know gay people who can't get employment. It has nothing to do with their identities. It has nothing to do with me being black and women. First of all, the industry is a shit industry when it comes to
Yeah.
hiring people full time in the arts. The arts are shit on. That's
Yeah.
just the reality of it. I'm out of academia right now currently, and it's not because I don't want to be in academia. It's also because the attitude towards people um, inside academia that think like we do, and people can take that in a way they want to. People who are basically dissidents, um, who have dissident ways of thinking, we're going to be ousted just like anybody else. It doesn't matter if we have great credentials. It doesn't matter if we have several publications. They're going to find a way to oust us because our vision of the glass ceiling is not their vision of the glass ceiling. And if anything, we're trying to break through the glass ceiling in a way because
Yeah.
it's almost like if you're too authentic with your experiences, going to what you were saying earlier, if you bring your personal experiences in too much into academia to try to connect with different people, it's like they shun that. It's like, no, you're in a club now, and we can only talk to each other, but yet you talk all this shit about people who you're supposed to be connecting to, which is the working class, all the different people in the working class, blacks, gays, whoever it may be, and it's like, isn't that the point to talk to working class people, not talk down to people? But it seems like academia has more interest in political careers and the vision of what it looks like on the surface and not what people are thinking inside.
Yeah, here's my take on it. Anytime you set up a competitive system, um, people are going to compete, and uh, DEI has become a point of leverage in a capitalist competitive system. And just the way that whiteness is a point of leverage in a capitalist competitive system. So you end up, the problems in academia are the problems in society, in the sense that you have DEI, which has become a social position to leverage against whiteness, and it has power behind it. And whiteness has been used to being able to leverage against everything. And as long as you set up that competitive system, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. It's a zero-sum game. So if DEI starts winning, whiteness starts losing. If whiteness starts winning, DEI starts losing. There's no solution in capitalism, in a competitive capitalist system, to race and identity. The only solution to race and identity is solidarity. And Fred Hampton said that himself when he said, we're not going to fight racism with more racism, we're going to fight racism with solidarity. And Fred Hampton said that, 50 years ago. So the problem is not necessarily the identities, which everybody has. The problem is that the identities are pitted against each other in a competitive capitalist system.
Wow, that's a very philosophical. Um, how do you translate what you just said to people who don't have? Because I feel like even within that explanation, and I'm guilty of this too. People say, "Kiko, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand what you're saying because the language you're using, it's almost like it seems like it's tailored to people who are more educated." That I
Yeah.
hear people tell me this all the time. It's like a lot of your episodes on the podcast are so interesting, but it's like we don't have the language capacity here to connect to what you're trying to say with your guests. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I see myself as talking to the powerful right now. When I'm in when I'm in my community, I'm listening. I'm
Mm-hmm.
listening to what people say, and I'm listening to what's behind what people say, so that when I get in a situation like this, I can speak for them because I've listened. And you know, it don't matter. We had a guy come in to the shop, needed a crank sensor on his car, didn't have any money. We bought him a crank sensor, and our shop foreman was putting the crank sensor in. He started talking to me. He's giving me all these conspiracy theories. He said, you know, the government seeded the atmosphere and caused global warming, and they accidentally seeded it over Antarctica, and it melted Antarctica, and there was Atlantis. And you know, it's like crazy conspiracy, but at the same time, at the core of that was hope. At the core of that was his hope that the world would become a better place. So it's not necessarily listening to what people say, it's listening to what's behind what people say, what the motivation is behind people saying the things that they say. And when I'm listening to people in my community, I hear the same thing, which is that this shit is fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hear all the time. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. Like things are bad and getting worse. That's what I hear all the time. And maybe it's just the context that I'm in, but that's what I'm hearing. And I try to use my intelligence and my wisdom to work through that to figure out why it is bad, and
Mm-hmm.
to come up with solutions that maybe that I'm trying to relay here, that maybe the powerful can say, hey, that's a solution.
But to me, based on what you just said, then wouldn't the goal? And I don't know. I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth, but you said, is that a good thing? Speaking for people, wouldn't the goal be for those people to speak? I
Yeah.
think that the masses. I think that the masses. I think we need that language. I think I hate academic language. That's the thing about it. I'm in academia, but I feel like because that's the language of the elite. I mean, that's the thing about it. It's the struggle that we have to deal with because my parents don't have college degrees. Neither
Yeah.
one of them do. But the only reason why I have this forum now is because of my father. He didn't go to college or anything. I'm actually going to have my dad on the show, but I don't know if it's I don't know what it is. Is it sensibilities? I just think is the sensibilities of the people aren't taken into consideration
Mm-hmm.
in this landscape that we're in. I don't even know if they were taken into consideration 50 years ago. If we're just broadly speaking about the political system,
Sure.
because if they were taken into consideration, people wouldn't be exploited the way that they are right now. For instance, you've had both presidential leading candidates go to all the unions basically. I mean, this motherfucker Biden messed up the railroad workers.
Yep.
And we know that neither president is pro union at all. I mean, we know that they're not pro worker at all. But there's just so many contradictions within this landscape we're in. You have Biden, who had the first president ever to be at the fucking picket line. I mean, just ridiculous shit, just optic stuff. And then Trump met, I think, yesterday with the Teamsters president,
I saw
Sean
that.
O'Brien. And
Saw that.
first of all, how's that even able to happen to where people are so they're going to be convinced by that, even though these motherfuckers have no track record of helping the working class, but they will get some credit by a large segment of people because they had a photo op with these associations. Like, to me, that's a serious problem. How are people able to be duped over and over like this?
Um, I think it's a fair criticism that I use too complex language. I've had that criticism before. Other people have made that criticism to me before. It's kind of just how I think. It's just what goes on in my head. Um, but I accept that criticism and I'll try to work on it. Um, I think that okay, every revolutionary ideology has to be led by some utopian vision. And the society that I would like to see built is small scale, face to face democracy and a cooperative economy. If you have that, you don't have the chance to have charlatans like Biden and Trump manipulate the people because all of the decisions are made in a face to face interaction in community. Now, in community, you can have charismatic people but it's lessened. You don't have people who are there just to manipulate. You don't have people who are there just to manipulate the population. And you're right. Like, we live in a society where every single piece of media is designed to program and manipulate people at the grassroots level and to make them think things that aren't true. And how do you battle that? I don't have a clue. I don't talk to our people about politics because I feel like they already know what they think. And I feel like they kind of are maybe wiser than I am about what their community needs.
Who is that
And
again? Who are you referring to?
my community, the people in
Okay.
my community, I think they're wiser than I am about what their community needs. Um, and I believe in them. Yeah, I do. I believe in them. So I don't. How do so back to the question of how does the community speak? Well, the community speaks when you have the utopian vision of small scale direct democracy. That's when the community can speak. It's a structural question. It's not a cultural or identitarian question. It's like, how do you organize society? And if you organize society where you can have small scale direct democracy, then the people's voices can be heard, where now they're drowned out by, clowns, basically.
Mm-hmm. And something you said there, um, I have the same problem too, connecting with people. It's just like I work with my mom, and this is full disclosure. I haven't told anyone this yet, but I have a second job now. I work with my mom at Walmart at night, and so I have just to have some income because I was a stay-at-home dad. You mentioned off camera and on camera that you're a stay-at-home dad or you're going to be one. I was a stay-at-home. I've been a stay-at-home dad basically since the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right before the pandemic, I haven't taught Spanish since 2018 because people would ask me because I was writing my dissertation then. I didn't finish my dissertation until a year and a half ago. The pandemic kind of delayed things even more, and then I had some psychological issues, just depression. Honestly, a lot of
Yeah.
depression. Trying to get out of the PhD program at UT Knoxville. But being a stay-at-home dad taught me a lot of things. I didn't think I'd be at this position right now. I thought I was going to have my job 5 years in. I thought I was going to be, I already had so much teaching experience, 12 years at the time. Now I have 15 years teaching experience. I just knew that I was on my way to getting that glass ceiling academic job at a tenure track institution because I had put in the hours, all the publications, all the high marks and passing the exams and going to all these conferences and stuff. And then look, and it's like now I'm not there. I'm working at Walmart as a second job. I have a podcast that I absolutely love. And I've told people I'd rather work at Walmart at night than teach kids at a school because I don't want to teach kids. I didn't go to fucking school. I didn't bust my ass all my whole life to teach kids. I want to teach adults. I've always taught adults. So why would I go and teach kids? And people would say, well, you're going back, Kiko, because you have a PhD and you're working at Walmart. You can't define what going back is for me. My peace of mind says that I'd rather work at Walmart with my mom than teach in a school and be a babysitter. I'm not doing that because I did not go to school to teach kids. I went to school to teach adults. I think people need to take ownership of what they want in their life. And I think you being a take-home dad is not going to, I think it's going to be a great thing for you, actually. I think it's going to give you time to reflect. It's going to be hard, but it's going to give you so much time to think about your life and just like the next move and the next series of moves. I think it's a wonderful situation to be in. And at least for me, being at home during the pandemic was an unbelievable experience. And I'd probably do it again, honestly.
I just want to say this. I drove for Uber after grad school. I delivered papers. And I can hear the anger in your voice, and I want to validate that. I want to say you're right to be angry. And you have every right to be angry. And I appreciate what you said about me being a stay-at-home dad. But yeah, they sold us a fucking bill of goods when they told us to go to grad school and run up all this debt and yeah, they sold us a bill of goods. And you have every right to be angry, and I have every right to be angry about it too. So I just want to validate that. And yeah.
No, it's yeah, some of it is anger, definitely. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't, but it's the same game that they used on all of us. It's what we're talking about now with these 4-year cycles, these circus shows. There's so many great people that are caught in the crossfires. And I had to dial back after the hot summer of 2020 with all the killings. You know, the killings that just started that summer, not just the legacy of Black people that have been killed by the cops. People in general killed by the police, over 1,000 a year on average, killed by law enforcement that have these immunity laws that protect them. They don't have any consequences. And after that summer, I had to kind of dial back. And I said to myself, I need to change the way I dialogue with people. I don't need to be getting into arguments with people anymore just because there's this stupid circuit show coming up. And as a matter of fact, before this cycle ends, I'm going to deactivate my Facebook account because I'm going to deactivate my social media accounts because your mental health now should be more important than ever. And I'm speaking to everyone in the audience. Mental health is super important. Don't allow anyone to tell you who to be friends with. We have to stop labeling people who are actually on our side as like the enemy. Like, we got to stop this stuff. And I see it too often. And just like the gut reactions when people say things, it's almost like they put it in our brains. It's like everything, they simplified it to where our brains have a simple, direct response: negative, 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 positive, positive, negative, negative. We automatically go one way or the other. We don't have any sort of nuance within our capacity to think, is it just bad? Is it just simply that and that's it? There's nothing else to it. But it seems like that's the way the thinking has become in politics and all walks of life.
I'm gonna go even deeper than that, and I'm gonna say next time you watch, Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson or something like that, watch how they chop it. Watch how they cut the scenes. They'll do it for 10 seconds. They'll cut it to another scene, 10 seconds. They'll cut it to another scene, 10 seconds. This triggers dopamine in your brain and makes you addicted to it. And it is literally mind control. It's literally mind control. And they have you associate this dopamine reaction with the words that are coming out of the mouth of the speaker so that you will feel good when they talk, and it'll make you believe what they have to say. And Guy Debord talked about this in Society of the Spectacle. He talked about this, 1969 or whenever it was that he wrote that book. And I don't think he could have possibly imagined how far that has gone. I
Mm-mm.
don't think he could have possibly imagined how far society of the spectacle has gone because it's all spectacle. I love football. I love football. But that is the biggest freaking spectacle out there. And, you know, it's got beer commercials and, you know, militarism and like all this other sort of crap associated with it. You know, the planes flying over at the beginning of the game, you know, it's militarism.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's, yeah, it's hard to break through that, and what you're saying is probably right. We might need to just turn it off.
And even with sports, it's so sad like having kids in this world too, and being kids ourselves. I remember when we were kids, I felt like even sports were more authentic. Like I
Yeah,
feel like everything is fake as fuck now. Like all the games are like so controlled. I mean, you have the fan duels, you have the DraftKings. You can see the influence live during the game. I mean, motherfuckers going for 2-point conversions and stuff when they got the lead and the game is tied and they're going for 2-point conversions when they could just kick the extra point. And just crazy stuff. And they're like, Kiko, why do you make such a big deal about it? Because it spills into politics. I mean, all these organizations are basically tied together.
yeah,
And so what you're watching on television is being controlled by somebody. They're programming that stuff for you to watch. So if
yep,
it's on television, you can't just see it as an innocent program anymore. It's not a sporting, it's not like going to a high school football game anymore. This is a game that has lots of sponsorship behind it. They've always had sponsors, but it's only gotten worse. And the corruption has only gotten worse and deeper. And so it's not just a simple spectacle anymore. It's a complex spectacle that's
yeah,
tied to politics.
yeah, yeah. You know what I do? I ask my 19, 20-year-old mentees what they're listening to, what kind of music they're listening to, and I get their music and I listen to their music. I turn the TV off and I turn their music, whatever their underground stuff that they found. I turn that stuff up and man, it's so good. It's so good. Ask a 19-year-old what kind of music they're listening to, and put that on your radio and turn the TV off, and you'll have a good night.
I like that. Yeah. Well, you know that there's a gap between that. I've tried to, test that on my parents. My dad understands. My dad's the DJ, so he understands. But my mom is harder to work on. If you don't play anything that's 80s R&B, she's like, "Oh gosh, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Damn, mom, you got to open your horizons a little bit. You just can't stick to East Sweat and fucking Freddie Jackson. I mean, I love those fuckers, but come on. I mean, you got to expand your horizons a little bit too."
Yeah, yeah. One of the reasons I do that is because I want to stay cool. I don't want to become a cheesy suburban dad. So, so I got to keep up with the music so I can stay cool and relevant.
That's hilarious. But I do want, before we go, and I definitely want to have you back on, Zach. This has been wonderful. This is a therapeutic experience. Like these experiences, talking with different types of people, they're really therapeutic. It's a way to connect with people. I've connected with my friends over the years that I don't see as much anymore because of these shows. And we appreciate you coming on the show, and we can't wait to have you back on. But I want to get a clarification. You mentioned the internal colony of the South, and when did you come up with that idea? When did you analogize the whole idea of the South being just a colony? Because I've heard you on other podcasts say that the is basically an extension of the global South,
Yeah.
the deep South.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of academic work done on it. David Jansen wrote his dissertation on the South as an internal orient. Isabel Machado has written for Ole Miss magazine about redneck horror, which critiques Deliverance and Easy Rider, and sort of how that those narratives create the South as an internal orient. So it's not my idea. I have expanded it and built on it, but it's not my idea. It's based on academic work. As anything that based on some sort of academic work that I've read. It's not. This doesn't pop out of my brain you know, completely formed. Everything that I know or have learned, whether it be from auto technician or academic work, is all from studying and learning. And I mean, I consider myself a lifelong learner, and it's very important for me to be able to be able to learn new things all the time. And you know, I give credit to people who came before me who have done the hard work of thinking through this stuff and have given me the substrate to work with.
Absolutely. And you make a great point. And that's the thing about academia is the whole idea of creating new ideas. And so that is perfect. I mean, that would be great. You would be perfect for that because you've expanded on something that already existed. I mean, I think we've all done that. And you know, that's the beautiful part of being in the academy and being associated with the academy is the stimulation of ideas
Yeah.
that really can benefit society. So I definitely miss academia in that regards, but I'd like to think of this forum as an extension of academia. Like outside of it, I can kind of do it my own way. I don't have to do it the University of California, Berkeley way or UT Knoxville way.
Yeah.
But are there any final words, Zach? Before we go today, I'm sorry I have some time constraints. Otherwise, we probably talk a little bit longer. But I just want to say I've enjoyed your presence again. I know my audience they're going to have a great time listening to this show. And do you have any final words for us?
I just want to say that I really appreciate you having us on. Um, and if you're interested in contributing to the Automotive Free Clinic, you can check us out at automotivefreeclinic.org. And yeah, again, I really appreciate it. This has probably been the best podcast I've ever been on.
Are you
Um,
serious?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
There's
incredible.
there's too often where the host wants to be the center of attention, and you know, this has actually been a conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate those words, Zach. And again, we can't wait to have you back on. And there's a lot more I want to talk about, but I'm very satisfied with what we did discuss today. Just to, you know, my initial, because this is more or less an introduction of you to the people on Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. But beautiful people, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Friday, we're actually going to have the first interview exclusively in Spanish, only in Spanish. My friend Ramon Muñiz Sarmiento, he published a book that discusses three authors in South America and what they battled during the early 1900s, their writing being women in Latin America, and how the constraints were used against them in poetry, for instance. And so that should be a very interesting conversation. I don't plan on having a ton of interviews in Spanish. I do have an audience in Latin America. It comprises of 18% of the international community audience, but I definitely want to just prepare people for that. And hey, if you don't understand Spanish, you know, sorry about that. But it's the one episode I had to get it in because I've interviewed Ramon twice. And if you want to listen to his interview, you can go back to episodes 12 and 17. But this episode 89, I've enjoyed thoroughly. And we can't wait to have you back on, Mr. Hyden.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Anytime.
coming on.
Anytime. I'll be on anytime.